actually had one of my clients talk about how important reorganizing their kitchen was to be successful in the kitchen because to your point, if everything is kind of everywhere and getting stuck, like I'm the first person to be like I'm done. Like I'm not going to fight with tongs and whisks and stuff in the drawers. Like that's just a turn off for me in the kitchen. So organization apparently is something. So yeah, what are some hacks around that, Lisa? Because navigating a kitchen can be well, depending on the size of the kitchen too, right? Like we've got to be very purposeful of what's in there.
Yeah, I mean, organization is huge. Like when I moved into this house, every house I've moved into, I always like look at how the kitchen is laid out and I think about the utensils I reach for the most often and what kind of things I use for just base. Like it could be like, oh, I use this spatula all the time for flipping pancakes on the weekend. Like I make pancakes almost every weekend, let's say. I always use this one spatula for that and I use it for also for this and this. So that's something I use a lot. I want this in the drawer next to me right by the stove because I use that all the time. So like thinking through your frequency of use of certain items, like the things you reach for the most, like probably a silicone spatula, wooden spoon, your flipping spatula, things like that, or like things you're reaching for a lot, measuring spoons for baking, especially things like that, like having them nearby. So thinking about how you lay out your drawers and your like canisters and things like that around the things that you need in it, like to be reaching for frequently, and then just organizing your kitchen that way. And then some things that you don't use as often, maybe like let's say like a pastry blender or something, is like something I use once every 2 months probably. So that's not going to be sitting in the front of my drawer. That's going to be either in a totally separate place in my kitchen for like infrequently used items, or like it'll have its own designated spot somewhere else, but it's not going to be like the thing that's jamming up the whole drawer because at the front, because I'm not going to be reaching for that all the time. So thinking about frequency of use, what kind of meals you're making, and having those kinds of items close by to the appliance you're using as well. Like I have my cutlery drawer right next to my dishwasher. So when I'm unloading it, it goes right in, like right next to me. I don't have to carry it across the whole kitchen and balance all these forks and knives in my hand, like that kind of stuff, right? So, and then next to your stove, you have all of your implements for cooking, things that you're going to clearly make on the stove. And then maybe if you have like an island or a separate counter somewhere where you do baking, that's where you keep your dry measuring cups and your pastry blender, let's say, or whatever it is for those more like baking type activities. So it's like kind of organizing your little stations around how you use those spaces. And then that also gives you a chance to go through your tools and maybe you're like, oh, I got this thing 15 years ago and I've used it twice. Maybe it's time to donate it. Maybe it's time to like cut back on some of these things that I have just had around forever and I don't use anymore. And that'll cut back on some of that clutter. And maybe you can open your drawer again if you're getting rid of some of those cluttery items. So stuff like that to think through, I think makes a huge difference.
Yeah. If you have the more tools and things that you have, the more that you're going to have to keep outside of cabinets. And if it's in a location where you can't protect it from dust, I'm thinking of numerous situations where I'm like, oh, I need to go use this one tool for this recipe, but you didn't account for the fact that you couldn't keep it in a cabinet. So now it's in kind of an open air location, maybe in a closet or a pantry or, something like this. And now you got to wash it before you use it because there's dust on it. Like, the more tools you have, the more, because if it's a tool that's multi-purpose, I love that part that you mentioned, because then you're going to be using it more often, less likely that that'll happen. I mean, it could be a niche problem for people with small kitchens. Like my kitchen's kind of small, doesn't have as much storage as what I would like. So that's a problem that I have. And it may be a problem for people that living in apartments and condos and things like that. The kitchen isn't large, so they have like a shelving unit beside their kitchen, in the space between the kitchen and the dining room, like the open shelving units and things like the wire racks or whatever else. And, that's not going to be protected by dust, very real thing. So the more you use it, the less likely that will happen. Because that's a frustrating, like, because you're never going to, like, who thinks of that? Like, oh, I got to clean the dust off my stuff before I use it.
I've totally had to do that a bunch of times too. Like something in the canister next to my stove, and I'm like, "Oh, I haven't used this in a while. I better like give it a quick wash," which is like frustrating in the moment when you're like, "I need it right this second." But yeah, those like storage shelving units and stuff, like you could always get little bins and stuff with lids if you want to organize stuff of like that you'd maybe use less often but want to protect from dust flying around and stuff. Then you can have it labeled as like, oh, here's some like baking specialty baking equipment, or here's some like whatever extra spatulas that are like my less favorite ones that, but I don't want to throw them out, kind of thing. And sort of have it organized that way if you have room. And then you can sort of create these modular storage solutions where it's like you can also stack the bins and stuff too, and that actually adds a ton of extra storage that way too. So yeah, there's definitely solutions for smaller spaces as well.